For decades, the story of Super Mario Wacky World has circulated like a digital urban legend, a spiritual sequel to Super Mario World that, rather than being nurtured by the comforting familiarity of Kyoto's development halls, was instead cobbled together by a third-party developer in California, running on a multimedia player so ill-equipped for gaming that it made the Atari Jaguar look like a cutting-edge dream machine. But the most baffling part? This game wasn't just pitched, it was made, at least partially. So brace yourself for today's tale as we'll be diving deep into a pixelated fever dream, one born not from Nintendo's magic, but from boardroom betrayals, CD-ROM confusion, and the unlikeliest of corporate bedfellows. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the strange saga of Super Mario's Wacky Worlds, the half-forgotten Mario World sequel that very nearly rewrote history. If you, like me, still consider Mario to be gaming royalty, then rejoice, for whether you're a bright-eyed youngling just now discovering the joys of our mustachioed monarch, or a wizened greybeard who remembers the days when he was nothing more than a pixelated plumber dodging barrels in the shadow of an angry ape, one thing is certain, generations have grown up loving this man in red. And the good news, thanks to a generous 26% discount on the Nintendo Switch Online Family membership through my link below, you can drag your children, grandchildren, nephews, nieces, and even bewildered grandparents straight into the Mushroom Kingdom alongside you. But wait, the magic doesn't stop there. I can also offer you up to 90% off a sprawling selection of digital delights, from retro curios and indie darlings to modern monstrosities and AAA titans. Whether you're gaming on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or even that Steam Deck thing that looks like it came from a future dystopia, you'll find something wonderful to play, and at prices that would make even Wario blush. So click those glorious links in the description, treat yourself and your loved ones, and help support this very channel while you're at it. Happy shopping, and I hope you enjoy this video. When Super Mario World graced our childhoods with its candy-coloured brilliance and dinosaur-mounted mayhem, it felt like the natural conclusion to Mario's 2D journey, the crescendo of everything that began on the NES. It was a game so masterfully constructed, so rich with secrets, and so visually arresting that many naturally assumed its sequel would follow suit, a continuation that would build upon the foundations laid down in Dinosaur Land and take us somewhere even more daring. And in some strange, technical sense, we did get that sequel. But rather than a new romp with Mario himself, we got a prequel, a pastel-painted, infant-flinging, crayon-doodled escapade known in the West as Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. Now don't get me wrong, Yoshi's Island was and remains a phenomenal game, packed with innovative mechanics and a singular art direction. But even its most loyal fans will concede that it wasn't exactly Mario World 2. It was Yoshi's game, and in that sense it was much like what happened with Wario Land Super Mario Land 3, a spin-off that eventually became the main event, starring a moustache-twirling anti-hero with a love for treasure and a contempt for personal hygiene. Brilliant, yes, but not a Mario game in the traditional sense. It was a reinvention, a branching path, a fork in the road. But as you will know from the thumbnail and intro, there was indeed a direct sequel in the works, a game that would have retained the look, the feel, the structure of Super Mario World, and even starred Mario himself. I'm of course referring to Super Mario's Wacky Worlds. This game wasn't some artsy reinvention. It wasn't a baby Mario escort mission or a Wario-powered detour. This was intended to be a true continuation of Super Mario platforming, with castles, Koopas, fire flowers, and all the rest. And yet, in one of the most bizarre twists the industry has ever seen, this so-called sequel wasn't destined for the Super Nintendo, nor was it quietly prototyped for the upcoming Nintendo 64. No, this sequel, this true spiritual follow-up to Super Mario World, was being crafted for the Phillips CDi. I shall now pause for dramatic effect while you pick your jaw up off the floor. Yes, in what must surely rank as one of the great what were they thinking moments in gaming history, the future of Mario, for a brief and ill-fated moment, was to be realised not by Nintendo themselves, nor even by a Japanese partner, but by a third-party American studio developing for a multimedia machine that couldn't even display sprites properly. So, what could possibly go wrong? The early 1990s was a chaotic, lawless time in the realm of home entertainment, a wild west of digital dreams and CD-ROM delusions, where hopeful companies threw their hats, wallets and reputations into the technological ring, all hoping to strike it rich in the post-16-bit boom. And if you were a gamer back then, over caution one had to exercise. For every Super Nintendo or Mega Drive, there was a 3DO, a Jaguar, or a CD-TV, systems whose ambitions far exceeded the actual volume of worthwhile software they would ever receive, dooming early adopters to dusty shelves and regret-filled wallets. Super Mario's Wacky Worlds, the would-be heir to Super Mario World, developed not for the Super Nintendo, not for the Nintendo 64, not for the Game Boy, but for that most cursed of curiosities, the Phillips CDi. Yes, the same CDi that gave the world Hotel Mario, and a trilogy of Zelda games so bizarre, so meticulously embedded into internet culture that Nintendo themselves seem to have retroactively disavowed their existence. Holding these thoughts, it seems almost unthinkable that the crown prince of platforming would be caught slumming it on such a misfit machine. But to understand how this ever happened, we must roll back the clock to the most infamous double-cross in gaming history, the moment Nintendo turned their back on Sony and everything that followed. It all began in 1988 when Nintendo, hungry for a way to keep up with the growing interest in CD-based media, entered into a partnership with Sony to develop a Super Nintendo add-on that would utilize Sony's proprietary Super Disc format. The result, many years later, would be referred to by collectors as the Nintendo PlayStation, a mythical hybrid device that supported both cartridges and CDs destined never to see the light of day. As development advanced, it became increasingly apparent that this deal was lopsided in Sony's favour. The Japanese electronics giant would not only control the Super Nintendo's audio chip, but would also retain considerable influence over licensing, distribution, and royalties for any CD-ROM titles released under the deal. And if there's one thing Nintendo has never been willing to cede, it's control. Then President Hiroshi Yamauchi, the steely-eyed warlord of Kyoto, was no fool. He'd seen enough. He didn't trust Sony, didn't like Sony, and certainly didn't want Nintendo's carefully cultivated business model, one that thrived on tight licensing and top-down control, being dictated by a partner with its own aspirations for market dominance. So, in a decision that would ignite a seismic shift in the gaming landscape, Yamauchi covertly began negotiating with a second party, the Dutch electronics conglomerate Philips, and what followed would of course send shockwaves through the industry. The time Nintendo kicked Sony through the barbershop window. Ah, the sweet stench of betrayal. Few things in gaming history reek quite so gloriously of corporate treachery and unintentional consequences as the moment when Nintendo stabbed Sony in the back with all the subtlety of a Looney Tunes villain. What began as a seemingly mundane hardware partnership in the late 80s, a harmless little collaboration to develop a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo, would soon spiral into one of the most consequential technological divorces the industry has ever seen. On a bright day of a 1991 Consumer Electronics Show, Sony marched proudly onto the stage to unveil this historic partnership, declaring to the world that the two titans of Japanese tech were joining forces. But what happened next was proper spicy, as the very next morning, and I do mean the very next morning, Nintendo took to the stage and coolly announced that actually no, they would not be moving forward with the marriage. Instead, they would be moving in with Phil from next door. So in front of a stunned audience and an enraged Sony executive team, Nintendo pulled the most public, humiliating stunt in gaming history, effectively torpedoing the original deal and lighting a fuse that would one day explode into the launch of the original Sony PlayStation. The fallout from Nintendo's CES ambush was apocalyptic. Sony, publicly cucked by Nintendo, forcing them to watch them getting it on with Philips, were seething, in response vowing to enter the console market alone, and within just a few years the PlayStation would debut to thunderous applause, massive sales, and a swift dismantling of Nintendo's dominance. It was the classic tale, scorned lover becomes rival monarch. You couldn't script it better. But as iconic as this moment has become, what became of Nintendo's new European bedfellows? Well, not much actually. Despite all the behind-the-scenes plotting, the planned Super Nintendo CD-ROM add-on, often referred to as the Philips CD-ROM XA, never materialized. No prototypes have ever surfaced, no dev kits, no tech demos. It simply evaporated. However, one thing did come from the deal. and it would have ramifications far stranger than anyone could have imagined. Phillips were granted the unthinkable, the rights to develop games using Nintendo's most iconic characters. No co-development, no Japanese oversight, no EAD involvement. Phillips, a company with no meaningful gaming pedigree, could now make official Mario and Zelda games for the CDi, and so they did. And the internet has never let us forget it. Yes, I guess some memes do come true, sometimes in the most horrifying ways imaginable.
Where are you heading, partner? Feed him! What the hell is even that?
As per their ill-advised licensing deal, Phillips wasted no time in creating games. They actually used the rights they'd been given. The result, a surreal trilogy of Zelda games that played like fever dreams, soaked in off-brand fairy dust, and voice acting straight from the pits of Microsoft Paint purgatory. Developed by the now infamous Animation Magic and the Reedies, Faces of Evil, Wand of Gamelon, and Zelda's Adventure were, how shall we put this politely, not good. In fact, they were critically panned disasters, so universally derided that even Nintendo pretends they never happened. In fact, Nintendo has scrubbed these titles so thoroughly from the official timeline that you'd have better luck finding the trifles in a bin behind the Weatherspoons. The Hyrule Historia, Nintendo's sacred book of lore, skips over them like a drunk uncle skipping a boring story at Christmas. To this day, Faces of Evil is more likely to be referenced in a YouTube poop than in a Zelda Direct. And then there's Hotel Mario, the CDi's token offering for everyone's favourite mustachioed mascot. To be fair, it wasn't as atrocious as his Hylian cousin, but comparing Hotel Mario to Super Mario World is like comparing a soggy crouton to a gourmet lasagna. It worked technically, the doors opened, the cutscenes played. Mario said, "All toasters toast toast." But as far as game design went, it felt less like Nintendo Power and more like a PowerPoint project given sentience. Still, despite Nintendo's best efforts to memory hole the whole affair, these titles have achieved a strange immortality. Their awkward animations, baffling dialogue, and uncanny voice acting live on, not as gaming triumphs, but as internet artifacts preserved forever in the golden age of YouTube poop. Link's dead stare, Zelda's shrill warble, Luigi's voice that sounds like it was recorded down a sinkhole. These things matter. They are our history now. And yet, for all the derision, the CDi's Nintendo escapades weren't universally cynical. Not every studio was trying to make a quick buck off a lazy reskin. One company, an American outfit by the name of Novalogic, genuinely thought they could do it justice. They believed, against all odds, that they could deliver a game worthy of Mario's legacy on the CDi. Founded in California in 1985 by John Garcia, a man with a background in military-grade software and a soft spot for arcade ports, Novalogic had previously cut its teeth on PC adaptations of Arkanoid and Bubble Bobble. These were no amateurs, they understood code, they had technical chops, but making a fast, fluid, sprite-based platformer on a system that didn't support sprites, that'd be like trying to build a roller coaster out of jelly. Yet still, they pressed on. Encouraged by a Nintendo sales executive who suggested that a stripped-down version of Super Mario World might just, maybe, sort of run on the CDi, Novalogic's programmers, Silas Warner and the industrious John Brooks, locked themselves into 2 weeks of caffeine-fueled hell. They would work non-stop, almost 24 hours a day, their goal to cobble together a working demo, not for retail, not for release, but to impress Nintendo, and somehow they pulled it off. As you see, what they produced wasn't just a slideshow or concept sketch, it was a playable slice, a small but functioning glimpse of what Super Mario's wacky worlds could become. The visual DNA of Super Mario World was intact, the gameplay was recognisably Mario, and most astonishingly of all, it ran on a CDi. The quest for the Lost Mario sequel was on, only this time it wouldn't take us to the Mushroom Kingdom, but to ancient Egypt, medieval Europe, the Arctic tundra, and beyond. And yet, even in those earliest moments, the question loomed like a Goomba on a narrow ledge. Was Novalogic ever truly up to the task? The most astonishing part of this whole misadventure, the madmen at Novalogic actually did manage to make something. Well, just about. After 2 weeks of brutal round-the-clock coding sprints fueled by desperation, instant coffee, and perhaps a pinch of misplaced optimism, the programmers emerged from the development trenches with something tangible. Not a pitch deck, not a slideshow, but a working demo, or at least a sliver of one. Sure, they'd only managed to complete fragments of a single level cobbled together from pirated sprites and stitched into place using software voodoo, but against all odds it was enough to impress the Nintendo reps. The meeting took place early on a Friday morning, and according to those involved, the final disc wasn't finished until 4 hours before the demo was due. This wasn't just cutting it close, it was threading a needle while skydiving. And here's where things get gloriously weird. Unlike most cancelled projects of the era, this one didn't vanish into legend, whispered about on message boards and fan forums. Oh no, thanks to preservationists and prototype hunters, you could actually play it today. Not some distant approximation or fan remake, but the actual pre-alpha prototype dated March 3rd, 1993, frozen in time and available to download from the darker corners of the web, a playable echo of an alternate Nintendo history. Now, let's be clear, this is no polished final build. It's rough, it's broken, and it's missing so much code that calling this a game is arguably generous, but it exists, and that in itself is a minor miracle. According to design documentation, roughly 80% of the artwork had been completed by this point, the handiwork of Nina Stanley, a classically trained artist who brought an astonishing level of finesse to the project. Her backgrounds, hand-drawn and digitized for CDi's clunky architecture, were based not on the Mushroom Kingdom but on real-world locations, ancient ruins, frozen tundras, medieval castles, etc., giving the game a unique, almost globe-trotting flavour. Meanwhile, Marty Folger, the project's lead designer, had finished 95% of the design spec, including full stage plans and enemy behaviours, all manually drafted on paper grids. The problem, only 30% of the game's actual code had been implemented, and even that was more duct tape than architecture. Enemies didn't really behave, they just sort of floated about, vanished if you jumped on them, and politely refused to harm Mario in return. Collision detection was barely functioning, level exits didn't always work, and the swimming mechanics, those staple water levels we all pretend to hate, were never implemented at all. The soundtrack, if you can call it that, was ripped directly from Super Mario World. No original compositions, no clever adaptations, just placeholder tracks awkwardly layered over the action, presumably dropped in to impress Nintendo and fill the sonic void. Sound effects, don't be silly. Aside from a solitary jump sound, it's eerily quiet, like Mario wandered into a museum after hours, and yet there's something kind of wonderful about it. Despite the system's catastrophic limitations, despite its lack of sprite support, despite the CDi's architecture being about as game-friendly as a fax machine, the Novalogic team made it work. Sort of. The sprites, many ripped directly from Super Mario World via video capture tech, move, jump, and animate. The parallax background scroll is janky, yes, but it's also undeniably Mario. To achieve this, the team had to create a full-blown sprite system in software. For context, the CDi didn't have any native sprite functionality. Every moving object had to be drawn, erased, and redrawn manually for every frame. An absurdly CPU-intensive process that made complex animations almost impossible. And yet here we are, with Koopas in tunics and vampire Goombas waddling across ancient backgrounds like they belong there. All of this running on a system that wasn't even designed to play games originally. But what is this weird adventure like to actually play today? Booting up the Super Mario Wacky Worlds prototype today is a surreal experience. From the moment you reach the level select screen, it's clear this wasn't going to be another jaunt through grassy plains and candy-coloured castles. Instead of the Mushroom Kingdom, you're obviously greeted to the pseudo-educational globe hop through ancient history and exotic locales. There's even a world titled Wacky, how appropriately meta, and another dubbed Tubular, a glorious time capsule of early 90s lingo if ever there was one. What you'll find inside is fascinating. There are Greek Koopas in tunics, Night Koopas wearing feathered helmets, Eskimo Koopas in parkas, and more. You'll also meet original enemies like walruses, encounter Trojan horses acting as background set pieces, and even stumble across mysterious stylized end blocks that don't do a damn thing. Warp pipes exist, but level progression is broken. Some stages loop endlessly or require hard resets just to escape, and yet beneath this broken scaffolding lies a spark, the outline of a genuinely intriguing Mario game. Had Novalogic been given more time, more money, and perhaps a system that didn't actively hate video games, Super Mario's Wacky Worlds could very well have been the CDi's one redeeming feature. The killer app, the crown jewel of a cursed machine, a reason to own the CDi other than to ironically shout, "All toasters toast toast" into a webcam. But alas, history had other plans. Despite Nintendo's early enthusiasm, reality eventually set in. The CDi was tanking hard. Nobody wanted it, nobody was buying it, and Novalogic, despite their bold attempt, weren't foolish enough to ride the ship down with it. Officially, the project was axed due to the platform's commercial failure. Unofficially, many believe Novalogic simply didn't want to throw real money at a game that would never see a proper release. Instead, they diverted their budget to the Comanche series, a line of military flight sims for PC that, while impressive in their own right, had all the whimsy and joy of a damp sandbag. The fallout was immediate. Several staff left Novalogic entirely, heading off to more stable pastures like Electronic Arts, while Wacky Worlds was quietly shelved, never completed, never pressed to disc, never sold at retail, and yet the story doesn't completely end there. Thanks to tireless preservationists and prototype collectors, 3 different builds of a game have surfaced and now circulate online. The most complete version, 0.11, dated March 3rd, 1993, offers a fascinating glimpse into what might have been. It's buggy, it's unfinished, but it's real. A lost alternate sequel to Super Mario World, buried beneath years of obscurity and salvaged from the brink of oblivion. Today we're left with fragments, half-finished levels, mute warp pipes, and Koopas in winter coats, a prototype not just of a game, but of what could have been an entirely different path for Mario. One not shaped by Miyamoto's careful hand, but by a bold, reckless swing from a developer with more ambition than sense, and a publisher with more hubris than hope. And for that, I say Wacky Worlds may have never lived, but at least it was born. If, like me, you still see Mario as gaming royalty, then don't forget you can enjoy him on Nintendo Switch today. With 26% off a family membership via my link below, the whole clan can join the fun, from sprightly children to confused grandparents. But that's not all. You'll also find up to 90% off thousands of other games, retro classics, indie gems, and even modern AAA monstrosities across PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and beyond. So click those links, treat yourself and your kin, and support the channel while you're at it. Happy shopping, and cheerio!